Hey, I'm Dr. Kirsten Wishloff. On today's podcast episode, we're talking about what to do if you roll your ankle. Everybody has done it, some people more than others. Today we are talking about rolling your ankle. Now, rolling your ankle is really interesting, and the reason is it goes far beyond your foot and ankle. It actually has a lot to do with vestibular system and your perception of balance. And that's a lot of the time something that people don't really think about until they're kind of forced to think about it, and then it makes a lot of sense. So usually there are absolutely instances where you roll your ankle just from outside reasons, right? Like playing a sport, roll your ankle, turn your ankle, walking, whatever the case is, there's always just incidents that happen and damage occurs. If that is you and you have just rolled your ankle and it's swollen, first and foremost, if it's feeling pretty darn swollen and pretty severe, go get an image. Make sure that it's not a fracture. Get an understanding of what you're dealing with. But even before that, I would say, consider seeking lymphatic care. So seeking out a practitioner that's going to be able to move fluid through your foot and ankle during the first 4 to 7 days of the injury is going to have a huge impact on how quickly you recover from that injury. And I say this at the start of the podcast episode because a lot of the times people will hurt their ankle or hurt something, it'll be swollen, they'll go, well, I'm not going to go in yet because they can't do anything yet. If someone has told you that is not correct, in my opinion. I believe that there's a huge value in getting lymphatic movement happening as soon as possible. No, that doesn't just mean ice and heat. This means manual lymphatic movement. If we can flush fluid through the system, it's really going to change the outcome in the ankle long term. The other thing that you're able to do in the short term is keep the musculature in the area active. You could do electroacupuncture for that. You could use a stim unit. Any number of things, but keeping the electrical activity up in the musculature of the area that's actually damaged is going to be super helpful in the short term. So if you are someone who just rolled your ankle and you're like, this happens all the time, I'll just leave it for a couple of days, maybe throw a bag of peas on it, make sure that you are getting some sort of lymphatic care. If at some point in the future I have time to make a YouTube video on lymphatic flushing for your ankle, I'll put in the show notes. It doesn't exist right now, but maybe one day it will be there. But that's really what we want to be thinking about if you acutely have rolled your ankle. Do you need imaging? If you go straight to the ER, amazing. If you are looking for some care, just find a practitioner that you trust. Give us a shout if you need some help in the GTA. But definitely don't hesitate to start getting care on something that's acutely inflamed and swollen. Okay, so let's zoom back out. So there was the kind of example of you just kind of rolled your ankle, quote unquote, out of nowhere. So if something happened external to you, rolled your ankle, is what it is. If that guy doesn't get rehabbed effectively, you may be put in a position where chronic ankle injuries are going to happen. Why does this happen? It can be multifactorial, as kind of with everything. But essentially what happens when you stretch out a ligament, so when we're talking about an ankle sprain with a P, that means the ligament has been stretched. The ligaments of your body essentially act as a brace on the inside of a joint. They tell your brain how far is too far to go. Once you have stretched out that ligament, your brain loses the ability to understand where is the end range of this joint. What is a safe, stable end range? It's overstretched, so that's really what we need to work to collect. Now, there's a lot of popularity with like wobble boards and balance training, and there's certainly value in that. But we also want to be asking, what are you trying to get back to? Because for most people, unless you're like surfing and skateboarding, for most people, the surface that you're pushing off of is stable, and you need to learn how to use your foot on a hard surface instead of something that wobbles. Because as soon as we're practicing on like a Bosu ball or a wobble board or something, your brain loses the ability to trust pushing into your foot. That's what unstable training does. So sometimes it can actually regress your recovery in your ankle if you're exclusively using unstable surfaces to regain that control of the ankle. This leads me into my next point, in that your foot and ankle are part of your brain. Your whole body is your brain. Everything is feeding into how you balance, how you move, how you understand the world. So we can't simply restore range of motion at the ankle without understanding how that foot is now being understood by your brain. For those of you who have had many ankle sprains and maybe it got to the point where you're like, I don't really want to rehab this, there's a good chance your brain is just going to push all of the force to your other leg. So you now learn to balance everything off on the other leg. There's a cascade of changes that are going to happen in your body as a result of that. It's going to change your brain's perception of what balance feels like and where you can trust to lean into that balance. Kind of same as that wobble board, right? You lose the ability to trust in your feet, so you start bringing that stability from up top. So part of that ankle rehab is actually going to be vestibular rehab. So making sure your eyes and your inner ear and your ability to change and move your head and body in space is connected and coordinated with your feet. I am a really big fan of using tempo-based training. So whether that's a metronome or a song, something where you're hitting a rhythm of movement so that you're jumping side to side, you're moving, you're turning your head, you're looking in different directions and learning how to trust your foot and its balance in rhythm and sequence. That is going to be the ticket to getting out of that chronic ankle sprain cycle that you're experiencing. So that is actually what ends up missing for a lot of people that end up within chronic ankle sprains, is that they have only seen the ankle and the foot as isolated pieces. They don't reconnect that stability in with the rest of the system. Hey everyone, Dr. Kirsten Wishloff here. I just wanted to pop in and remind you, if you are not yet on the wait list for the Posture Revival program, jump into the show notes and get on that wait list. The Posture Revival is an 8-week program designed to rebalance your movement and peel apart layers of imbalance that live within your body. You can finally uncover the underlying cause of those chronic injuries and get back to doing the activities you love. Even better, it is eligible to be used with your healthcare benefits for physiotherapy or chiropractic. So again, please jump on that list. The link to register is in my show notes. So just with regards to how do we get your brain to kind of map out that ankle sprain and what would put you at risk of having a chronic ankle sprain, one of the biggest things that I see in clinic is an inability to pressurize the big toe. If you were to, YouTube how to rehab an ankle, oftentimes they'll practice kind of like picking up the outside edge of the foot and going into like a pronation eversion type of position where you're kind of rolling the calcaneus in and trying to shorten the spot on the outside. So the idea being, let's control fibularis, so the muscles on the outside edge of the shin, so that you can be really strong, so that the fibularis group can pull up and resist the ankle sprain. The problem with that logic is that muscle group fibularis is not a hugely strong place to leverage motion. What is really strong is plantar flexion and movement and pressure through your big toe. So what we actually want in order to prevent an ankle sprain from moving forward is we want to really train that person to understand pronation, so flattening out their foot and pressurizing their big toe, because that is actually the biggest piece that's going to capture and prevent an ankle roll. It's not going to be exclusively focusing on the strength of the outside edge of the lower leg. It's going to actually be plantar flexion, pronation, and big toe. So the ability to actually push your foot down and in is going to be what stops your ankle from rolling when you hit an unstable surface. If we haven't spent time to reintroduce that movement and made it reactive, so done it at speed with tempo, you might not have it there when you need it. So that's often a missing piece when it comes to that ankle rehab, is getting that pronation, that dropping in, to be a super strong movement. People really shy away from practicing flattening your arch, which is pronation. They shouldn't, because it is the other function of the arch of your foot. Arch got to come up, arch has got to go down. The purpose of an arch is force absorption and movement. We can't just have it be stiff. So practicing the ability to flatten and navigate your foot is going to be hugely important in the correction of the foot mechanics after an ankle injury. Okay, last thing I've got here. We'll chat through treatment a little bit. So what actually happens when you've injured your ankle, and for the most part, I'm talking about inversion ankle sprains. There's certainly other areas you can damage your ankle, but for the purposes of today, we're going to talk more specifically about ATFL, which is the ligament that's most commonly rolled in people. What ends up happening when you damage the structures of your ankle is it changes the ankle mortise. So the ankle mortise is, if you think about, look down at your ankles, there's two bones on either side. Your ankle mortise is the joint that kind of resides within those two bones, malleoli, if you will. When we have structural damage to a ligament, so if something is unstable on one side of your joint or damaged, your body is going to tighten up things that do not have structural damage. And it's going to try to lean into stuff that it feels like it can lean into. So a really common compensation and structural adaptation that happens within an ankle is the posterior structures of your ankle start to tighten up. Now, these are deeper than your Achilles tendon. They're really hard to get to on your own. If you're not a therapist and you've never tried to navigate them, they're really, really deep within your ankle. If those tighten up, that's going to be the mechanism for that feeling of pinching in the front of your ankle that you may get if you have hurt your ankle before. If you're someone that has been trying to get dorsiflexion, so if you're squatting or lunging and you're trying to get your knee further over your toe, but there is a pinch blocking you in the ankle, there is a chance that the structures on the posterior aspect of your ankle mortise have tightened up in response to previous injury. So you can certainly work to expand those with manual therapy and needles and different treatment strategies. But one of my favorite ways to actually do that is to start to leverage the control of the subtalar joint. Now, the subtalar joint is one level lower than that. And the idea with leveraging that subtalar joint and the movement in pronation, supination, essentially what we're trying to do is really get your calcaneus, like having a more dynamic path of movement, is it's going to allow your body to trust different movement without directly hitting the area that's aggravated. Sometimes we want to stress into the area that's aggravated. There's a purpose to it. But if you are feeling a joint pinching, it means you're not going to get anything by forcing into that pinch, because the way that that joint is collecting movement isn't going to be sustainable. So if you are someone that falls into that category of that pinching sensation at the front of the ankle, what we really want to get crafty at is actually mobilizing that calcaneus and hoping that within doing that, that talus is going to normalize its movement a little bit too. I certainly talk about these on my social media pages, but these are the ideas that we want to be navigating when we're talking about injuries such as an ankle, because I think there is a lot more to the conversation that is missed when we're just kind of loosely looking for things on the internet to help. And the biggest one that I noticed, and I brought it up through this podcast, is the vestibular and kind of brain motor control element of these injuries. That is the missing piece for the most part when you're searching out solutions, or even if you've taken formal education to try to, be physio, chiro, athletic therapist, et cetera, whatever the case is. I think there's many components of that are oversimplified by simply looking at the ankle itself. So make sure that you, if you have aggravated your ankle, are seeking care for lymphatic. Make sure that you are understanding it is all about getting your brain to trust balance in your foot again, not exclusively about rebuilding strength. A lot more of it has to do with coordination. Strength is certainly helpful, but coordination of that strength is going to be much more beneficial in the early days of an injury. That's because if we can normalize that coordination, you can do anything for fitness and your ankle is going to get stronger. If you don't go through that process, you're going to get back into your fitness, your sport, whatever, with compromised movement patterns that are going to trickle out somewhere else in your body. So this is why that coordination and trust is important to rebuild whenever we've had an ankle injury. Don't get too caught up in the ideas of unstable surfaces, because I think you're going to often miss the big picture, which is trying to actually get your body to trust balancing and pressurizing your foot. And then lastly is make sure that you're aware of what a not so rehabbed ankle looks like. So that example I shared at the end with that pinch at the front of the ankle, we want to make sure that rehab doesn't just mean it feels okay at rest and it's not super swollen anymore. It means you can do whatever you're trying to get back into doing without pain stopping you or getting in the way. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to stop doing everything, but you really want to be conscious of these compensations that are going to be happening if you do still have kind of an active injury or an area your body isn't trusting. Because it's really going to serve you in the long term to bring that piece back into action and put a little extra effort in and not just react always to pain. So hopefully that gave you guys a little bit of insight into things to consider for that ankle injuries. It was very nice having you. As always, please ask me any questions you have. It is always helpful to get reviews, so I do really appreciate them. If you put a review, couple suggestions, little feedback, I love it. It's super helpful to help me grow this podcast and reach more people, get you out of pain. Thanks for tuning in. I will check you next time.